Good morning, and welcome to the Reagan Institute. I'm Roger Zakheim, Director of the Reagan Institute, the DC office of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute. In 1980, the 20-something son of a former congressman and Prince George's County executive was named the chair of Youth for Reagan. He's looking quite youthful today, I might add. He had supported then Governor Reagan during the 1976 presidential primary, and now, young Larry Hogan would serve as a delegate to the 1980 Republican Convention. And you know, we have a lot of Reagan devotees join us at the Institute. But I think Governor Hogan may rank above them all. You see, he didn't just support Ronald Reagan in 1976, in 1980, in 1984. He managed to support him in 2020 as well. Now, I know you consider President Reagan your political hero, Governor, but that, sir, that's real dedication. And by the way, you didn't have to do that just to be invited here today. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for joining us. We're honored to welcome you virtually to the Reagan Institute through our Center for Civics, Education, and Opportunity, led by our own Dr. Janet Tran. We work at the nexus of these three pillars, answering President Reagan's call for an informed patriotism to ensure a prosperous future for America. And the 62nd Governor of Maryland knows quite a bit about this call. We are truly honored to have Governor Hogan with us, a man who, through pragmatic, principled, and patriotic leadership, has carried the flame of our 40th president. Now, if you know about Governor Hogan, you know that he doesn't mince words. He's been just as quick to criticize members of his own party as those of the other party. And as it turns out, that kind of equal opportunity straight talk is very popular in Maryland. Throughout his tenure, Governor Hogan has ranked one of the most popular governors in America, usually in the top two. He reminded me beforehand, recently, number one. And one Maryland poll this year gave him a 75% approval rating. In a state that just voted for Joe Biden almost 2-1. These are numbers most politicians dream of. And it's not like Governor Hogan has an easy go of it. He's led through tough times, from the death of Freddie Gray to polarizing issues in the state legislature to the COVID-19 pandemic. The people of Maryland have come to rely on his steady stewardship. And at the same time, he's faced extraordinary personal challenge. Fighting and defeating cancer during his first term, today I believe is the anniversary, 5 years since he's been given a clean bill of health. And yet here, today, he is still standing, which of course is the very fitting title of his recent memoir. Now, there are a lot of great stories in this book, from political life to legislative fights, but personal anecdotes can really be the best. Like the story of his first lunch with the future First Lady, where they shared a waterside meal of salad and crab cakes, and Yumi, the accomplished painter and choir singer, suggested ordering tequila shots. Now, by the way, that might give still standing new meaning. But you've had to read the book to get the full context. When Larry Hogan won the Maryland gubernatorial race in 2014, the Baltimore Sun called it, quote, a stunning upset. But after 4 years of smart governance, guided by Reagan-esque optimism and leadership, with a focus on economics and education, it wasn't so stunning when he cruised to re-election in 2018. But now, the governor is term limited and will be out of office after 2022. So the question on many minds is this: can he shock the political world again? Now, I don't know if we'll get an answer to this question today, but we might just get a clue of what's next. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Governor Larry Hogan.
Well, thank you very much, Roger, for that much too kind introduction. Good morning, everybody. It really is an honor to be back here at the Reagan Foundation and Institute. The first time that I realized I was a Reagan Republican, it got me into a little bit of trouble. When I was a young college kid, I had the honor of being selected, as Roger said. I was an alternate delegate to the Republican National Convention in Kansas City in 1976. My father had served in Congress with Gerald Ford and actually played a pivotal role in Ford becoming president. And he was a campaign chairman of the Ford campaign. I admired President Ford. He was a good leader and a decent and honorable man. But when it was Governor Reagan's turn to address the convention, I was mesmerized. Reagan seemed to connect with everyday people, and he channeled that connection toward a bold and optimistic vision for America. An America everyone could be proud of. An America everyone was a part of. So there I was, enthusiastically marching on the convention floor with my Reagan hat and carrying my Reagan sign. When my dad spotted me, let's just say he wasn't completely thrilled. But it was at that moment that I proudly became a foot soldier in the Reagan Revolution. Of course, Jimmy Carter defeated President Ford and won the White House. The aftermath of Watergate had seriously tarnished the Republican brand, and many wondered if the GOP could ever win national elections again. The New York Times declared the Republican Party, quote, close to extinction. But then Reagan built a big tent coalition of Republicans, independents, and Reagan Democrats who wanted America to be that shining city on a hill. He worked hard to heal our party's divisions rather than exacerbate them, and to move us past the scandals and division. He focused on the everyday concerns of working folks and struggling families, not the obsessions of the chattering class in Washington. In 1980, just 4 years after the predicted demise of the GOP, Reagan led our party to one of the largest landslides in American history, and then went on to truly make America great again. After this divisive election, we find ourselves again at a crossroads for our party and at a critical time for our nation. As we search for a way forward, we should look back at how Ronald Reagan transformed our party and restored the greatness of America. I believe that what most Americans truly want, regardless of their party affiliation, is honest, effective leadership and results. They want common sense solutions to the serious problems that face us. President Reagan certainly understood this, but it seems that many in Washington have lost sight of that basic truth. Reagan was known as the great communicator because he understood the limits of rhetoric. He wasn't focused on scoring partisan points. He was focused on solving real problems affecting the lives of all Americans. And he knew that to be successful, it would take reaching across the aisle to find common ground. President Reagan didn't believe that compromise was a dirty word. He knew all or nothing was a false choice. For his entire presidency, Democrats controlled at least one chamber of Congress. Yet President Reagan, one of our most conservative presidents, was also one of our most successful. He worked across party lines to pass the most conservative agenda in decades. 2 rounds of tax cuts for the American people, shrinking the bloated federal bureaucracy, and a historic buildup of the nation's defense to defeat the Soviet Union. Reagan said, "There is no limit to what you can accomplish if you don't care who gets the credit." The results spoke for themselves. Decades of unparalleled economic growth, the Soviet Union consigned to the ash bin of history, and a renewed pride in our nation and our shared values. Today, America faces a new set of 21st century challenges. Sadly, Washington insiders seem more concerned with winning arguments than actually advancing bipartisan solutions. Neither side seems to want to make progress. They just want to make demands and win arguments. That's not leadership. That's just political theater And most of us are sick and tired of all the drama. The COVID-19 pandemic and the economic collapse that it has caused have shown this problem in stark relief. For months, struggling families and small businesses have been desperately in need of immediate relief. But instead of working until they reached a compromise, Congress played politics and went on vacation. Contrast that with America's governors. When COVID-19 struck our shores, I was proud to be chairman of the National Governors Association. We pulled together governors from all across the nation in a truly historic, bipartisan way. Governors on both sides of the aisle stepped up on the front lines together. We understood that in times of crisis, partisan politics must be put aside. The failure of Washington to effectively combat COVID and the failure to pass the stimulus package are just the latest examples of the dysfunction in Washington. Our nation's infrastructure has been crumbling for decades. The failure of Washington is made manifest in falling bridges, failing public health and failing schools, and an entire generation of Americans who are falling behind. But in Washington, people on both sides refuse to give up even a little to get a lot done. Roads and bridges crumble while Democrats and Republicans insult each other on social media. The cost of education and quality health care are out of control and out of reach for everyday Americans. One party wants to impose radical solutions that would create more problems than they would solve, and the other party all too often offers no solutions at all. The result is a crumbling vision of the American dream. The average citizen is completely fed up with politics as usual. They think that Washington has been fiddling while America burns. On the world stage, China threatens not just America's economy, our farmers, manufacturers, and innovators, and our standing in the world, but even the values we stand for: prosperity, liberty, and freedom. Meanwhile, one party in Washington refuses to acknowledge the threat, while the other abandons the very allies we need to confront it. And we never seem to be able to find any common ground on these urgent issues. The solution, according to the professional politicians in Washington, is to give them more power. More power in Washington won't fix the divisiveness and dysfunction. It'll only impose more dysfunction on our lives. Faith, civic, and business leaders who are serving their communities, state and local governments that are working every day to solve real problems. We don't need Washington to dictate. We need Washington to get its act together. We need Washington to make it easier, not harder, to solve problems. We need Washington to be a partner, not an impediment. A large majority of Americans are thoroughly convinced that our political system is fundamentally broken, that we as a people are tragically divided, and that Washington is completely dysfunctional. Most of us are sick and tired of the angry, divisive politics. Americans believe in civility and pragmatism. They think straight talk is more valuable than empty rhetoric. These are the things that my party is going to have to focus on if we want to win national elections again. Americans are not as divided as our politics and social media would suggest. The problem is not the American people. The problem is that politicians think the only way to get elected is to feed the extremes, to fire up the base, and that the only way to govern is through winner-take-all combat. The extreme voices that dominate social media, cable news, and talk radio only represent a tiny sliver of Americans on the far left or the far right. Over 70% of the rest of us belong to the exhausted majority. People who are fed up with politics, who feel forgotten by both political parties and ignored by Washington. Most Americans want the same thing. They want humble, tolerant, respectful, and effective leaders who will work together to find bipartisan, common sense solutions. They want us to appreciate that no one of us has all the answers or all the power. They want a discourse that tolerates contrary views among a diverse citizenry without turning political adversaries into enemies or doubting their patriotism. They want a government that protects the vulnerable without dictating how we live our lives. They want a strong America that stands with its allies and for freedom in the world without taking for granted the sacrifices required for it. They want to stand together with their neighbors and feel proud of their country once again. These are the same Americans who Ronald Reagan spoke to. His vision of America isn't just a relic of some bygone era, but an ideal that we can and we should once again aspire to. 6 years ago, I won the biggest surprise upset in America by committing to usher in a new era of bipartisan cooperation and prosperity, one filled with hope and optimism. When I took office, Maryland's economic performance was 49th out of 50 states. 70% of both houses of my legislature are progressive Democrats. But we cut taxes and regulations and created the biggest economic turnaround in America. Just imagine what we could have done with a Republican legislature. While both parties in Washington argue about Obamacare, we worked across the aisle to pass innovative health care reform, reducing insurance rates for everyone by more than 30%, while also covering hundreds of thousands more Marylanders. While our nation's infrastructure crumbles, we move forward on all the top priority transportation projects in our state, including the largest P3 transit project in North America, and moving forward on the largest P3 traffic relief project in the world. While we've seen nothing but gridlock from inside the Capitol Beltway, I was working with the Democratic Governor of Virginia on an accord to actually fix the gridlock on the Capitol Beltway. As it turns out, common sense, bipartisan solutions are exactly what nearly everyone seems to want. More than 70% of every single demographic group in my blue state approve of the job that we have been doing. I don't say this to brag. I say it to dismiss the misguided notion that to get ahead, you have to tear down the opposition. I have spent 6 years repudiating the debilitating politics practiced here in Washington, where insults substitute for debate, recrimination for negotiation, and gridlock for compromise, where the heat, finger-pointing, and rancor suffocates the light, and the only result is divisiveness and dysfunction. What voters really want is for their leaders to actually focus on solving the problems that we were elected to solve. And if we were able to do that and accomplish that just down the road in deep blue Maryland, then there's no place in America where these very same principles cannot succeed, just as they did under the leadership of President Reagan. Ronald Reagan won 2 landslide elections and created a movement that endured for a generation because he understood the simple truth that successful politics is about addition and multiplication, not subtraction and division. It's one thing to win a presidential election, but quite another to build a broad and durable governing coalition. To accomplish that, Reagan knew that he needed to speak to all Americans. Reagan stood for bold principles that were universal. For him, a big tent party was not just an electoral imperative, it was also a moral one. He knew that if our party wanted to truly represent America, we could not ignore any part of it. My state hasn't voted for a Republican presidential nominee since George H.W. Bush over 30 years ago. In 2014, when I was elected governor, we had the highest Democratic registration in America. And in 2018, in a blue year, with a large blue wave, we lost the House, we lost governors, We lost seats in legislative bodies all across the country. But I became the second Republican governor to be reelected in the entire 242-year history of our state. I did it by reaching out to everyone, including those who had never even considered voting for a Republican before. In some places, they had never even seen a Republican before. Too many in both parties have bought into the false narrative that the way you vote is predetermined by where you were born, where you live, the color of your skin, who you love, or where you worship. In this past election, the electorate was historically divided. Republicans did make some modest gains with Black and Hispanic voters who were turned off by far-left elitism and political correctness run amok. But in Maryland, we proved that a Republican can win support from Black, Hispanic, and Asian Americans, suburban women, and younger voters, not just to gain a few points, but to win overwhelming majorities. Look, the truth isn't always easy to hear. But as Roger said, I'm a guy who tells it like it is. So here's the truth that our party needs to hear. Divisive rhetoric and toxic politics is alienating large parts of the country. And no one will listen to our message if they don't believe that we're listening to them. We cannot continue failing to expand our tent the way Reagan did. Addressing the real concerns of everyday people is harder than political virtue signaling or preaching to the choir. But that is what a large majority of Americans want and what they deserve from their elected leaders. Reaching across the aisle and finding common ground is harder than simply attacking those with whom you disagree. But it can be done. As Reagan said, we are once again at a time for choosing. Are we going to be a party that can't win national elections again? Or are we willing to do the hard work of building a durable coalition that can once again shape our nation's destiny? Some Republicans want to return to the way things were before 2016. Others want to keep heading in the same direction, as if this election never happened. That is a false choice. The answer is not to return to a party that often spoke only to the Washington establishment, or one that only speaks to the hardcore base. For decades, Republicans have appealed to the memory of Ronald Reagan, while forgetting the true spirit of Reagan's legacy. In the name of Reagan, Republicans dogmatically applied obsolete policies without recognizing how the world has changed and without questioning old assumptions the way President Reagan did. The GOP used his successes as an excuse for obstinance. Our party forgot Reagan's call to, quote, begin the world over again. We let Reaganism become the language of the country club, Washington think tanks, and the Senate cloakroom, instead of speaking to the folks in middle America who powered the Reagan Revolution in the first place. Our party does not need to return control to establishment insiders, but we cannot afford to continue to perpetuate toxic politics. America is at a critical crossroads. Unless we begin to change the self-destructive course that both parties are on, this mess will just repeat itself all over again in 2024. Ronald Reagan said, freedom was never more than one generation from extinction. We must heed those words. We cannot take the blessings of liberty for granted. We must work to secure them for our children and our grandchildren. Look, I'm more than willing to stand up and fight for the things that really matter, but not for status quo politics and not to perpetuate polarization and paralysis. We have to show those who have lost faith in our party and those who feel forgotten by Washington that we can actually get things done and that we can make their lives better. We not only need to return to our principles, but we must reinvigorate them with common sense solutions that work for the 21st century challenges we face. We don't need another autopsy to know that we can't bring more Americans into our ranks by only speaking to the folks who already agree with us. Voters value being heard more than being told what they should want. We don't need Washington politicians, the media, or political consultants to tell us who to hate or what to think. Americans are yearning to be brought together, not driven apart. What we need is less politics as usual and more real leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, I, for one, refuse to give in and accept that anger has taken the place of the common good. I refuse to give up and accept that the best days of the GOP and of America are a thing of the past. I come from the get to work and get things done school of politics, and I'll work with anyone who wants to do the people's business. I still believe that the party of Lincoln and Reagan is the last best hope for our nation. And I still believe, as President Reagan did, that America remains the last best hope of man on earth. Thank you, God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America.
Thank you, Governor Hogan,
Thank
for that
you.
Great set of remarks. And
Thank you for that great introduction.
well, we worked very hard on it.
I don't know about the tequila shot part.
So, that's a good story. Well, a lot there to unpack in those remarks, and you know, listening to your approach, and the remarks really reflect what you've done as governor, really cutting against the grain. You know, on the one hand, you are stridently anti-establishment. On the other hand, you are not going to allow yourself to be confined to the base. That's compelling as an idea. Explain to me why that is a compelling outlook to get elected.
Well, the proof is in the pudding, right? So in 2014, that formula made me one of the second Republican in 50 years to be elected governor, and that same in the most difficult state in America. And that message helped us get reelected in 2018 when some of my colleagues, really great guys, lost their governorships, and we lost the House of Representatives, we lost legislative bodies, legislative seats. So the message has been proven to work. I just happen to think if you're able to reach suburban women and minority voters and younger voters with a message, then you're going to be much more successful, as we have been under the most hostile of circumstances in a deep blue state. But I think most people across America feel the same way, and most polls would show that most people really want to see the things that I've been talking about and the things that we've been focused on.
But that's in Maryland, and you know, as your book, which is a great book, you know, the
Thank you.
Still Standing. I'll give it a little plug here. If you don't have it, get it, read it. It's
We're
fantastic.
going to work on a sequel today. It's still
Yep.
sitting. Still sitting.
But that works in Maryland, where the party organization is not like the national GOP.
Yeah.
And you know, you write about a primary in Maryland. Not that it was easy,
Right.
but certainly is not like the complicated primary thicket
Right.
that a Republican like a Larry Hogan would have to face. How would you get through the primary with the message you share with us today?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question. Look, in 2018, I didn't have a primary challenger, but in 2014, I ran against several elected officials, all of whom were trying to run to the right. There were 4 people in a primary. I was the small business owner who had never held elective office, and they were all trying to run to the right of me and just focus on talking to the Republican base. But the voters decided they actually wanted to win a general election, and so they voted for the person they thought most identified with them. Look, it's a very difficult challenge. The way our structure works with a gerrymandering for all of our congressional seats and legislative seats. It's you only have to win a Democratic primary on the left or a Republican primary. There's no competitive seats. But if you look at this last race, I went out and helped a whole lot of Republican candidates.
Talking about 2020.
In 2020,
yeah.
Phil Scott, Susan Collins, 6 or 7 Republican congressmen that were in districts or states that the president lost overwhelmingly, and where Hillary Clinton won in the last race. But we were successful in helping to elect every single one of them, because it is really what most people want.
I mean, Senator Collins is a great example, but it's getting through that field.
Yeah.
And particularly because the point that you make in your speech, people would counter that argument and say, well, look, President Trump received over 73 million votes. And if you remove COVID-19 alone, he would have received more votes than Joe Biden.
Right.
And so I'm just making that point to suggest perhaps it was a winning formula.
Well, it was and it wasn't. So all these candidates I'm talking about far outperformed the president. I ran 44 points ahead of the president in my state. So there are other voters out there. Look, I'm not saying the president doesn't have a strong support in the Republican primary voter base, but I think Republicans would like to control the White House and govern America, and that's what Reagan did so effectively. And like it or not, I mean, the president didn't win, and so now we have Joe Biden as president for 4 years.
So let's talk about that. President Trump earlier today tweeted out, I'm going to quote this by memory because it's not hard, "I won the election!" exclamation point. I think I got it right. What's your response?
Well, look, when President Trump was first elected, I was at a Governors Association meeting on a stage like this, and somebody said, "What advice do you have for President Trump?" And I said, "Stop tweeting." So 4 years later, I would give him the same advice. Look, we need to make sure every single vote is counted. There certainly is a process for challenging any irregularities that we have, but so far there hasn't been any evidence, and they haven't won any cases. And over the weekend, I think the president said something about Joe Biden winning, and then he retracted it, and now he's saying he won. I mean, it loses credibility with, more and more Republicans every day are coming out saying, look, we're in the middle of two twin crises. This COVID-19 is spreading all across the country. Hospitals are overflowing. People are dying, and our economy is collapsing. And the president is tweeting all day and night about beating Joe Biden instead of focused on let's have a really successful next couple of months in focusing on these problems.
So you're saying focus on transition, and when is the right time to accept this outcome and concede?
I mean, tomorrow will be 2 weeks since we haven't seen anything. The time has come. I mean, more and more people, very close supporters and friends of the president, are all giving him that advice. So he's just not listening.
We're going to follow up one more on this, and then we'll move to more policy matters. One of the things the president continues to put out in Twitter and other fora is fraud. That this election had, issues with it that we haven't seen before, certainly enough here that puts the outcome in question. Now, you're a veteran of elections. You've won elections, right, as you've shared here, in a state that is blue. What's your response to claims of fraud?
Well, I know a couple of the states. Look, I think in every single election, there's going to be some things that weren't done properly, and there may be a dozen votes or a couple hundred votes here and there, and we ought to get to the bottom of it because we have to make sure that the process works. But we're not going to make up for 5 million votes in all of those states. It was a pretty overwhelming victory at this point. It's last time the president didn't win the popular vote, and he had less electoral votes than Biden does, and he called it a landslide.
Right.
So the reality is that, look, we ought to find out if there's anything wrong, but so far we haven't heard anything.
So your book certainly teases out the differences in outlook, policy, approach between you and President Trump. Without question, President Trump has dominated the political discussion in this country. When you look at it, whether you like the president, people praising him, or damning the president, what do you see as a central problem with his leadership? It really goes to elements of your speech. On one hand, is an issue simply of just pragmatism, how to win, or is there something deeper, more fundamental, as you see as the difference and the problem you have with President Trump?
Well, look, on the issues, I think a lot of people agreed with President Trump, but they didn't like his tone, and they didn't like what they perceived as, kind of a loose affiliation with the truth sometimes, and they didn't like the anger that was on both sides, but he was certainly helping to, stir the pot on. And I think they didn't like, he wasn't effective. So even though we had a Republican Congress in both houses for 2 years, the things he said were one thing, but there's a lot of things that didn't get done. Like the top focus was infrastructure. It was going to happen right after.
Right.
Instead, they went and had a big fight on healthcare and didn't accomplish anything. And he talked about the wall, where Obama built more wall than Trump did. That was his primary focus. But we didn't get anything done on all the other issues that he ran on. And so I think it was effectiveness, tone, and I think he could have gotten more done. And I just think sometimes the president was his own worst enemy.
So you speak in your speech about the so-called exhausted majority. Seems to be, in your mind, the key to really winning, the conservative Republican winning in a presidential election. Expand on that. Who is the exhausted majority? And again, is it policy, or are they exhausted by the style, or both?
I think both. So, this is not my term. I'll give full credit to the New York Times did a piece that they talked about this, and it's a group called More in Common that talks about, I think, that there's more, we have more in common than we have dividing us. And they did national surveys and said this. More than 2/3 of the people felt that way. And I think it's a little bit of both. Part of it is they don't really identify with far left. There was a rejection of the far left in this election. But they don't really identify with the far right. They're somewhere in between. The vast majority of Americans are moderate, or they're right of center, left of center. They're small percentages are on the extremes, but that's pretty much all you hear about is the folks, this 15% and this 15%. The other 70 are the ones that really want pragmatic solutions to the problems. I don't think our common sense conservative principles were what lost. In fact, all the candidates that I know that espoused those won. But we did lose, and we got to take a look at why. And I don't think right now either party is speaking to those folks in the middle. I think the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, as I mentioned, has turned off a bunch of people that wouldn't even consider voting. The Democratic Party's moved so far to the left that their longtime people that normally would vote Democratic, they were not really happy with either of the candidates. They wish that we had more of a politics like what I'm talking about.
Yet, and I heard this perhaps explicitly in the speech, certainly it was between the lines, that coming out of this election and certainly during Donald Trump's presidency, Republican Party became the party of the American worker.
Yeah.
That it left what you called in your speech the party of the establishment or the country club.
Yes.
That's something you still would keep and focus on in your vision, right?
I think the president did an excellent job of reaching the common average working person that I was talking about, but then turned off young voters, suburban women, and every other demographic, whereas Reagan was able to put them all together. Look, I'm a conservative outsider who ran against the monopoly in Annapolis, who had never held elective office. This was before Trump, when he was doing a reality TV show. In 2014, I was appealing to those same people. I won blue-collar Democrats and union workers and all those folks, but we also reached out and built that broader coalition. Trump did a really good job of that, but you have to figure out a way. You don't win. You don't get to govern if you don't win the election. And we've got to figure out why we didn't win the election, because we don't lose that many incumbent presidents very often.
One more, and reading your book, and you had some line in there about the think tankers and the establishment and policy intellectuals.
I know that was you guys.
Yeah, I know. It was like, and it was like something to the effect of
nothing personal.
Those papers put me to sleep, something like that.
Well,
and which is fine. We'll make them a little more exciting, I think. But
that's a good question, though.
the question I had is that there is a debate inside the Beltway.
Yes.
Right. Right now about what the future of the party should look like. how much of Trumpism should be integrated, whether Reaganism is a thing of the past or there's a fusion opportunity. Things along those lines with policy ideas behind them. You as an outsider, non-establishment person, is that debate at all relevant? The work of the intellectuals trying to kind of set the...
I think it's relevant. And so the point that I made in my book, which is, and I didn't mean to demean all of you intellectuals that are in Washington, but I served on a group called, the board of directors of a group called the Maryland Public Policy Institute, and we came up with really great, thoughtful, pieces about how to solve the economic problems we were faced with, but no one ever read them. And so it's not the ideas that are wrong. It's we're not marketing them well. We're not selling them to the average person. And so I started a group, after being on that board, started a group called Change Maryland, which was focused on, I ran because I'm a small businessman and was frustrated with 43 tax hikes in a row, that half the people in my state wanted to leave, that we had killed tens of thousands of businesses and a couple 100,000 jobs, and I was going to change that. But I said it in ways that the average person, whether they were Republican or Democrat, said, yes, that's what we want. And I didn't get into divisive battles on all kinds of other issues that we didn't agree on or might not agree on. But it was taking those ideas and communicating them, which is what I think Reagan did really well.
So you're telling me a think tank didn't come up with they're taxing the rain in Maryland? That did not come from there. That was effective.
So the Maryland Public Policy Institute put out a great paper about why stormwater management fees were wrong to be forcing the counties to charge this state-imposed fee. No one even paid attention, but I called it, now they're even taxing the rain.
Yeah.
Because that's where the storm, and 90% of the people in my state agreed we shouldn't be taxing the rain.
Exhausted by the taxes, you put that. No, that kind of ran throughout the book. Let's talk to governance, because so much of what you emphasize in your speech today and in your book is what happens after you get elected, and that's part of the critique you have of President Trump. COVID-19, it's spiking again. Those who are back in school are questioning whether they can remain in school. Businesses that have managed to reopen at a certain capacity, your state reducing the capacity, may not be able to remain open. Talk to us about how you've governed how you prioritized public safety, public health, at the same time, the economy.
Well, look, this has been one of the most difficult challenges that America has ever faced, and that we as governors have ever had to face. I had some challenges early on being governor with the rioting in Baltimore. We had my personal struggle with cancer. I went through lots of contentious issues. Nothing has been as complex or difficult as this COVID-19 crisis. And trying to balance keeping people safe while also worrying about those small business owners and those people that might lose their job. We pulled together the best advice, the smartest people we could find, not just think tanks, but public health doctors and scientists and business leaders, and some think tanks, and we just got the best advice we could get, and we had to make quick decisions. I think early on in the pandemic, I was chairing the National Governors Association. Sometimes I pushed back when I thought we weren't getting the help we needed on testing, on a national testing strategy. But look, the White House, Mike Pence did a great job chairing the coronavirus task force. I led 54 calls or Zooms with all of the nation's governors, and 30 some of them with the vice president, Dr. Birx, Dr. Fauci, all the cabinet, sometimes the president. We had to work together because it took everybody at the same federal, state, and local level working as one to fight this. But it's by no means behind us. Because, and this is where I think the biggest mistake the president made. They had great success on Operation Warp Speed. We have 40 Maryland companies that are working on vaccines. One of them is one of the three that they just talked about in the press conference a couple days ago. But the messaging on it's going to disappear, it's only 15 people and soon it'll be nothing, that anybody that wants a test can get one, that it's going to be over 14 days to flatten the curve, that it's going to be over by Easter, it's going to be over by July. Well, no, it's not. And not wearing a mask. It's not a political issue. This is about to say,
it is now.
If we just wore the masks, we wouldn't have to shut any businesses. but we didn't and didn't pay attention. Now, South Dakota has 60% positivity today. You know, the virus is the worst days ever. Hospitals are starting to overflow again. You know, we had to rent an ice rink to stack dead bodies because the morgues and the funeral homes were full. I mean, this is not a joke. It's real. And it's the worst thing since the 1819 Spanish flu.
Right.
And we have to take it seriously. Now, they've done the administration did some great work. They reached out to the governors, the Operation Warp Speed. We pushed them, the governors did, to step up Defense Production Act so we can make ventilators and desperately needed supplies. So there have been some successes. But we would have a great meeting with the Vice President, whole coronavirus task force, all the governors on both sides.
Right.
And then the President would have a press conference a couple hours later where he said just the opposite. And steps on everything everybody was working on.
So this is, let me pull the thread on that, because this is something that is discussed repeatedly. President-elect Biden, has his task force already, and people are skeptical that he's actually going to put forward something qualitatively different than what the current administration has in terms of a plan and what they're emphasizing. It seems to me that you're simply, perhaps you agree with that, and the difference ought to be in terms of the messaging coming from the top, or is there going to be something substantively different?
Well, my biggest concern is that, number one, that we don't lose the progress we're making. The president's messaging had people concerned about the virus, about the vaccine, but we really have made great strides on the vaccine, and we have to get it done. So I don't want to see them go back to the drawing board. We have a lot of things in process, and I'm concerned about their not meeting. So when the president there's no transition, they won't give the information, and you have guys that don't know anything that are coming we're in the middle of a war, and we don't know who the general's going to be. We don't know what the game plan is, and we can't wait till the end of January. 200,000 people are going to die between now and the inauguration. We have to get on it now.
So we'll open up questions to the audience in just a minute. One of the kind of underlying themes here is federalism, right? How much of a role should the federal government have versus the states? As a governor, how jealous were you of the authority to be able to take care of your state and keep, quote unquote, the feds out?
Well, look, I'm a big states' rights guy, and the governors were on the front lines, and we didn't mind stepping up. And there's a lot of things that we can do better, and we should have the decision-making on. But there were certain things that only the federal government could do. So early on, we had 50 states competing with one another and with the federal government and with other countries for a really constrained market on desperately needed supplies that were in short supply, and that was crazy. Whereas the federal government could have taken over that process and distributed it. But I'm not one that says, the federal government should solve the problem. The governors, had a huge role to play, but we were doing things that we don't normally do. I'm negotiating with foreign countries to try to negotiate.
South Korea came in, right?
Because the federal government wouldn't give us any tests. It didn't have any tests, and there weren't any tests in America. And so I went to, talked to the president of South Korea and the ambassador and negotiated for 22 days to get 500,000 South Korean coronavirus tests. At the time we got that, it was more than the top 5 states in America combined had tests.
So are you concerned, though, come January 20th, that there will be increased role of the federal government interfering with the way you want to manage your state, or do you feel what you're hearing it should work out okay, get the right balance?
That's a really good question. I don't know the answer to, because we haven't heard much out of the existing administration on coronavirus, because we're in the election controversy but this afternoon I have a call with all the governors, with the vice president and the coronavirus task force. So hopefully we'll kind of have a better understanding of what's going on there. I'm concerned that I'm not sure what the Biden transition team, I saw they were appointing a bunch of people, none of whom have been involved.
Right.
And we got to get them up to speed if they're going to be ones in charge.
So we'll go to a question just a minute. Please indicate if you have a question. I don't think we need a microphone here, but if we'll have one out if it's required. There we go. Just indicate. Last question. It's been in 2024. It will be 16 years since we've had a president who was a governor. Of course, President Obama wasn't a governor. He came from the Senate. President Trump never held elective office. Joe Biden, of course, was in the Senate for decades. Does it indicate that somehow a governor cannot win in the current political environment? That's part one. And part two, what's missing when you have a president who has not been an executive before? Governor?
Well, first of all, I don't have any disagreement with having been a private sector, real estate business guy who never held elective office, because I was one. So I'm the outsider that never held elective office and became governor 2 years before he became president. So I'm, that's good.
That bio you're okay with?
I'm okay with people being outsiders. I think some of our best presidents have been governors, and we haven't had one recently. But I mean, there's this guy from California, Governor Reagan, that was a pretty good president. Obviously Bill Clinton. Most of our presidents were governors until just recently, and I'm not taking anything away from some of our leaders in Washington, but I think being an executive, running things and making decisions. I run a $50 billion budget with 60,000 employees and departments of private sector. That's different than arguing in committee in Congress and voting on things and never getting anything passed.
I didn't get the sense from your speech that somehow you wished you were in the Senate making floor speeches. Yeah. I got that much. Let's go to the audience for a few questions. We have about 10 minutes or so left. Why don't we have Anita?
Oh, sure. Thank you very much.
We're going to take, if you don't mind waiting for the microphone. Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you very much. Governor Hogan, thank you. This was really inspiring to hear from you today. I'm Anita McBride. I work at American University. I also work with one of your appointees, Tiffany Waddell, who we work on right now, Women PAC, and very excited about having grown the ranks of women.
I just appointed a woman chief of staff, and my deputy chiefs of staff are women. We've got more women in our cabinet, so I'm a big believer in.
I know you are, sir, and you also are a big believer in personnel as policy, and hiring the right people allows you to execute on your priorities. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, because I want to dip into your having been a Youth for Reagan chair and really being inspired, and so you know how important it is to encourage young people to stay engaged. I have a little bit of a two-part question here. So I'm the club advisor for the American University College Republicans. Surprisingly, at a very liberal university, we really have grown our ranks. They also were volunteers on your re-election campaign 2 years ago. I liked what you said about informed patriotism. So what are the elements that we should, of those of us who have been a part of the party for a long time, inspired by President Reagan as well? I was a volunteer on the 1980 campaign in Connecticut, not a Republican state. But what should we be doing to keep them engaged? Because a number of them do feel disaffected by the rhetoric of President Trump. And it is difficult on college campuses to be Republicans. The other part, if you can tie it to, as our nation inches towards our 250th anniversary as a nation, and that informed patriotism that you talk about, how do we encourage young people to feel proud about the history of our nation, as complex and complicated as it is? And what are you doing in your state, or if you all are involved from the state level, on supporting the 250th, the semi-quincentennial?
Well, it's a great question. And first of all, thank you for your leadership in trying to get more young people interested, involved in politics. And I think this is a good thing. It doesn't matter to me if we get them involved in the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. We need more young people pay attention and be involved in the process. And I was 10 years old when my dad first ran for Congress, but I was a preteen Republican, and then I was in the teenage Republicans, college Republicans. I was president of the young Republicans. Now I'm an old Republican. But my campaign was fueled by mostly young people, and I brought in people into my administration that were really young. People said, "Wow, you got a bunch of kids working there," but they happen to be some of the smartest ones in the room. And I think I was talking earlier about people, a big portion of America being turned off by politics. I think nowhere is that more true than with young people. they just don't see how it's relevant to them, and they don't feel like they can make a difference, and they've sort of just given up. They tune it out, and we've got to really work hard to re-engage them, and they are, you know, the future, and the next generation. I'm worried that we don't have enough young people that will be our future leaders that are interested in this, it's, you know, not everybody's going to grow up like reading the congressional record and working in campaigns like I did as a kid. But I think they need to be paying more attention to the people that are making decisions and how it impacts them.
Jim.
Thank you. Governor, thank you so much for being here today. And
Thank you.
let me agree with Anita that your remarks were absolutely inspirational.
Thank you.
And quite frankly, I served in the Reagan White House. It was you know, an honor and a pleasure to be able to serve the President and the First Lady as well.
Thank you for that service.
Thank you. And I have to say, listening to your remarks, but that I saw you speaking, if I had read that speech, I could have believed that it was a Ronald Reagan speech. It was you know, tremendous. And
He had a lot better head of hair than I did, that's for sure.
me too.
I had a pretty good one until the cancer thing.
I left the Reagan White House and started to work in higher education, and have been doing that ever since. And I'd ask you your position on a couple of things about higher education. The whole world of higher education, and post-secondary education in particular, is changing as a result of changes in artificial intelligence, and schools realizing that they have to take a new approach to making available to students what they really need.
Yeah.
The traditional schools are traditional schools, and they continue to do much of the same things. But some of the small ones in New England are closing because they're not offering what students need. I would say that I work closely with one of your schools, University of Maryland Global Campus, and they have a program that offers all kinds of opportunities, you know, credentials rather than just degrees, and the kind of opportunities that, quite frankly, are going to be even more necessary as jobs are lost. You know, you think about 2 million truck drivers in the United States. Does anyone think there'll be 2 million truck drivers 10 years from now? Not likely. And a lot of those guys that are, and women that are driving those trucks now, you know, maybe 20% of them retire 10 years from now, but the rest of them will be needing skills and upskilling. And
Sure.
I'd like to hear your thoughts in terms of that issue.
Well, absolutely. This is a big issue about, you know, we've got to be teaching kids for the jobs of the 21st century. Some of our higher ed people that it's kind of like taking a shot at the think tanks and the intellectuals. I don't want to take a shot at academia also.
This may be your last invitation from a think tank.
You guys might not invite me back again, but some people are stuck in the old mindset of this is the way we educate the kids, but they're producing people who can't get a job. Meanwhile, there are skills that we really need. As an example, well, you mentioned AI. University of Maryland College Park, it has the Brendan Arib Center. Brendan Arib is the guy who started Oculus, probably the foremost authority on artificial intelligence, and in some of the stuff that he's doing there. We just opened a big center at the University of Maryland to attract more of those kids. It's one of the best in the country. But we, at UMBC, University of Maryland, Baltimore County, we produce more cyber talent than anywhere else in America. We have 11, you know, we're the cyber capital of America, the home to NSA, US Cyber Command. They have an insatiable need. We have private sector companies that are hiring kids at really high salaries after they get these kinds of skills. And so we have 11 centers of cyber excellence. And so you can't just teach the old things that nobody wants, that there's no demand for. We've got to change. It's all about workforce development, training. Some of it is not a 4-year degree. Some of it is, you know, going through and teaching them things that they can go get a job right away. And so we're big on internships and on workforce development and on switching our higher ed facilities over to training for the jobs that we need.
We have time for just a couple more questions. Sorry. I ask our questioners to keep it to the question. Or in the back.
Sam Melamed, it's great to see you. I'm a proud Maryland Democrat who voted for you and supported you twice. And
Thank you. See, I wasn't making it up.
I'm glad to see your pragmatism now getting onto a national stage.
Thank you.
I'm curious, in Maryland, you've been a strong supporter of public education, but you've also floated the Boost and Boast bill for some school choice I'm curious, especially with the educational suffering and COVID in the K through 12 going on in the country, where do you see that movement leading to over the next few years? And on a national stage, what role does the federal government have in promoting school choice?
Well, that's a great question. First of all, I believe that every single child in America deserves a world-class education, regardless of what neighborhood they happen to grow up in. We put record funding 6 years in a row into our public schools, but we also, I'm a big believer in school choice, and we've helped give people the opportunity, kids who were in persistently failing schools in bad neighborhoods, who wanted to get the opportunity with boost scholarships, we call them, to be able to attend the school of their choice where they have more of an opportunity for a future. This is a very popular thing among Democrats. Polling shows about 90% of the people in Baltimore City are in favor of school choice because their schools are failing no matter how much money we put in, and some of the kids have no other hope for a better future. So we want to do both. We have to improve and invest in public education, but we also want to help our private schools, which are in COVID, by the way. This is one of our most difficult challenges. How do we safely get some kids that really need it back into the classrooms without endangering the kids and the teachers? Most of the private schools are open. Most of the public schools are not. And the enrollments in the private schools is surging because these public schools are not providing what the parents want them to have. So this is something we're going to have to take a look at as we move forward. I think the federal government does have a role to play, but I think it's most of these decisions are on the state and local level.
Governor Hogan, we are so grateful for you joining us here at the Reagan Institute. We look forward to you coming back here. Wish you the best of luck and the remaining years you have left serving as Maryland's governor, but no doubt you will continue to be a leading voice within the Republican Party and across the country as we push forward into the next term ahead. Please join me in welcoming or thanking Governor Hogan for being with us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Roger. Appreciate it.
There you go.
That was really nice. I really appreciate the opportunity.